Welcome to Life Cycles Live. We've got Mr. Cliff Williams with us, and Cliff is flipping awesome. If you haven't met Cliff, and you guys hear me say this often, you don't know what you're missing out on. Cliff, thanks for joining us today. How you doing, man?
Oh, it's great. It's great to be with you. Absolutely, my pleasure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's going to be tough to live up to all those sort of, those accolades. Let the others judge, I think, is best.
Yes, and we've had some colorful people on here, right? We had like Tom Moriarty last week. We've had Bob Latino. We've had Sonia. We've had Jesus Safante was one of our first guests. Suzanne actually, Suzanne Greenman, who you know well, actually met with us and couldn't get her video feed to coincide. So we went like half video, half audio, and that was when we were, really getting the show rolling. And you know what? Even despite those things, we've never had a bad session, and that's just because we keep this unscripted. It's completely just people hanging out together. Everyone who's watching right now has the ability to interact via chat. So if you've just tuned in and you want to interact with Cliff or me, just enter comments in chat. And if they're not completely inappropriate and they're relevant, I'll pull them into the feed. And but if you're trying to get a hold of Cliff because he owes you $20 or something, I'm not going to be able to put that on the screen. So just a heads
It's
up.
interesting that you mentioned all those people, and they're all good friends of mine. Every one of them is a good friend of mine, and I thought that I was opinionated until you mentioned all those people. So I don't think I can go amiss here if those are the people that we've had, and I know I have watched them, and yeah, so yeah,
Yeah, that's
great,
why you're safe here, man. Because there's nowhere to go but up.
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. So for those that aren't familiar, we try to talk about it's a big world. We're not just maintenance and reliability. We talk about people. We talk about different methodologies. We talk about cool assets, the whole dig. And of course, this is brought to you by East Partnership. And we host courses and do cool stuff there. And if you haven't checked us out, go check us out. And that's all the advertising I like to do. So, Cliff, let's talk. Let's talk about where you've been for the last 50 years, dude. I am.
Um, yes, the last 50 years, and I'm just thinking it was actually probably about 53 years that I actually started as an apprentice.
Wow. What
And
grade?
uh, if I say fitter and turner, then nobody's going to know what it is. So it's a millwright. In North American terms, it's a millwright, and it was with the British Steel Industry, and it was a good experience, except that I really didn't want to be doing it. So it was something that my dad kind of forced me into. I had wasted a bit of time in school and didn't quite get where I needed to go in school as far as university was concerned. And my dad, who in his world, the tradespeople were the gods. And so he said, wow, you get it. You get a job for life, and he was right. He was right, and I've had it for life, but I've still got it. So yeah, that's how I started out, and then moved from an apprentice and became a planning engineer many years ago that we can probably talk about later, and then emigrated to Canada 40 years ago.
Wow. So
Yeah.
is that more in line with Sonia's comment here, where you're a young guy? So you were really just you're 40 years old, is what we're getting at.
Yeah, in Canadian terms. So that's okay. Yeah, we can start, if we start, I'm kind of 40 years AW after Wales
There you
or
go.
something. Yeah, so that's,
Or-
I'm good with that. I'm good
Yeah.
with that. Yeah.
I've
Um,
actually spent 7 weeks in Colchester, England.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I feel your pain, but
Yeah, I don't know where that's at in relation to where you grew up in England, but I enjoyed it. I was there for diesel mechanics school for Paxman, MAN B&W engines, and
okay.
Paxman Valenta 6V92s, and it was a great time.
How long ago was that?
That was 2001. It was right after, well,
Oh,
2002. It was right after 9/11, a year after 9/11.
yeah. So not too bad because by that time, a lot had changed in England and Wales. There were a lot of changes from 70s to 2000s, with industry leaving and all of those things. Yeah, and I came to Canada 40 years ago to work in the Canadian steel industry, which I did for 6, 7 years, and then went into the paper industry. And got to be honest, that paper industry was the best learning experience ever. Oh, it was incredible. It really was. I think what helped was that we built and then operated what ended up being the only 100% recycled newsprint mill in North America.
Oh.
So every drawing had revision 1 on it. Every problem had revision 1 on it. And we saw problems that the manufacturers of the paper machines had never seen, because they'd never done this. And wow, it was great for learning. It was really, really good. So that was great. After that, for my sins, I ended up going into the food industry. And for anyone that's in food industry, I'm glad you're doing it, but just wasn't for me. And I think the reason that I didn't really take to the food industry was that in pulp and paper, in steel, in those types of industries, the big, heavy industries, asset industries, maintenance has a really significant role to play.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't have maintenance and reliability, then you don't get that product out there. In the food industry, you do what sales and marketing tell you. So consumer packaged goods, the people that run that are sales and marketing. So you can have all of the plans and you can want to do all of the things that you do, but if when I work for Coca-Cola, okay, great. And we may have plans to do things, and then Pepsi decide they're going to put a loss leader on the end of the shelf, for that week. And all of a sudden we'll get a message come through that says, okay, you're not shutting down and doing all your maintenance. Oh, no way. You got to now switch and run this product because we need to get out there to combat the competition. So I think that's why I didn't enjoy it as much. It's definitely a different approach and a different perspective to things like pulp and paper and steel, where one decision can be a monumental decision. And the other thing is as well that in CPG, consumer packaged goods, they tend to have multiple lines. So you take one line down, okay, that's okay. You've still got 8 other lines that produce a product, and you're okay. In the steel mill and the paper mill, you take the line down and you produce nothing.
Yeah.
So the pressure is even harder, but it was great. It was pressure, but as I say, it was a great time for learning.
And all this lends itself to the comments and discussions that we've had quite a bit on this show about operating context. And you could take some of these methodologies and practices and tools and all this great stuff that's readily available to all of us, and you could put it in any one of these industries. And the people that implement it properly understand that there's a difference in operating context between one industry and another. And it's not just environmental, it's got everything to do with things like business practice and key drivers and all that strategy stuff that M&R people don't like to step in. But the reality is, those drivers were changing the way you guys were able to execute and schedule maintenance. That's good.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you look at things like planning and scheduling. Okay, there's so many best ways of playing, or there's a best way of doing planning and scheduling, except that it's the best way for somebody, not everybody. My last experience was as corporate and reliability maintenance manager for a chemical company in Canada, plants in the US and South America. But our availability at those plants was somewhere around the 99% mark.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
When do you get time to do maintenance?
Yeah, there's not much
When did you,
capacity built in there.
yeah, when do you do planning and scheduling? And it really becomes that, okay, you do planning, you don't do scheduling. It becomes opportunistic. It becomes okay when something would happen in the process, or we have that sort of 1 hour period. You need to have all of your work at least planned, kitted, everything else, but the scheduling side of it never came into play. Never came in the paper mill. We had what we called the 24/7 board, and it was a big whiteboard that was up on the paper mill floor, and it was actually 2, 4, and 8, but we used to call it 24/7. And it was a list of jobs that could be done in 2 hours, a list of jobs that could be done in 4 hours, and a list of jobs that could be done in 8 hours. Work order numbers, kitted stuff like that. So that if for some reason the paper mill went down, then the tradespeople can go into the board and say, okay, talk to the production people and say, how long do you think it'll be down to sort this issue? Oh, we're going to be down 4 hours. Okay, we'll take a 2 hour job. If they say we're going to be down 8 hours, we'll take a 4 hour job.
Just opportunity based.
Opportunity based. It was planned because again, you never have the time to actually do all of the things that you wanted to do. So 100% your point is that yes, all of these things are out there, but when you get to the operating context of where you are, you have to adapt. You have to make it work in that environment. So that and that's a challenge because some people forget that, and they will take great learning, absolutely great learning, and get back to their place and try and apply it. And it's not, it's like, okay, we're going to do planning and scheduling for Urco, the company I work for. What's the point? You can schedule till you're blue in the face. You're not got time to do it. I'm sorry. So, why bother? And so it's getting that idea and getting that understanding. So that's why it's been interesting going from pulp and paper and steel, which, we're talking thousands of dollars, a minute, and you don't want to be taking things down to as we say in CPG. Yeah, you take a line down, it costs you $5 because you just switched another line on and ran the product. So your mindset changes, and whereas in things like CPG, you can actually take your time to make a decision because you're not impacting, productivity. Pulp and paper and steel, you got to make a decision. So don't be waiting for all the information. If you're waiting for all the information, you're going to get fired because you can't. So you do your most informed guess and go with it. So that was, but it was, as I say, it was when I think back about the pressures we were under, where we were the first and the only type of mill, and we ended up doing things that the manufacturer said you can't do that. The paper mill builder said you can't do that, and we said, well, we're going to do it, and it was really, really interesting. So that's what I've been doing for the last 50 years.
Well, it sounds like you had your hands full. And we had a pretty interesting discussion before we got started about all the different aspects of the industry and how it is. We didn't talk particularly about this aspect of it, Cliff, but it is something that's always going in the back of my head when I have conversations with great people like you about the different elements and aspects of these industries. And my whole job working with the government in a capacity of sustainment planning for large assets is that we know that the world that we're acquiring the asset for, like we build a submarine or a ship, we're going to introduce it into a world of a certain design, but we know that that's extremely unpredictable. And when I send that thing into service, we've got to have the sustainment plan just right to account for a lot of the risk, and a lot of the unknown elements of support and operation that are going to exist, because we might design something to certain criteria, but we know it's not going to get used to certain,
Right.
to the T.
Right.
There's not going to be some guy saying, well, hold on a second. We said we were only going to operate this thing X number of hours a year. You're not allowed to cross that threshold. That's never going to happen.
Right. Right. Yeah.
It's a good design target, but it's not going to end up being like gospel for the operator. They're going to operate it however they see fit to support a mission. And
Right.
you're trying to give them a robust application because of that.
Yeah, we had along that sort of line is in that paper mill. Many of the rolls are covered rolls. They have rubber around them. They have sort of vinyl, whatever it is. And the one thing we said to the manufacturers of the paper machine after having immense problems with one particular roll, and we said, okay, we're going to take the covering off and run it bare steel. And they said, you can't do that. No, there's no way. You can't run, this suction press roll without a cover. You're going to damage everything. Look, and it's the same type of thing as you said. You send the vessels out there, and if something's not working, somebody's going to do something different.
Right.
They're going to make it so that you can achieve your mission. So we said, look, we got to achieve our mission, so we're taking that cover off because we can't run the way that way it's designed. Great intent, as you say, and yeah, definitely. But sorry, no, we got to do that differently. So
yeah, and it gets crazy in the military sector because configuration management of a fleet of assets is like a big thing for us. And if we used to call those chief alts, right, or chief alterations, because the chiefs on the ship on their way would be like, I need to get that thing out of here, rip it out. And they wouldn't tell anyone, or they'd put some new thing in place and not say anything. And he'd be going around as a port engineer. I'd be going around going, where did that pump come from? Where did that valve come from? Where's this pipe from? Like, this isn't configuration. And we've flipped the script quite a bit in this industry to get more toward like more refined configuration management process. But we're in an entirely different thing. Our asset is designed and built for one customer and one application of use, and that's a very broad and crazy application, but it's we know who our end user is going to be. For a lot of the industrial manufacturers, they produce a thing and they don't really know exactly who's going to buy it when they design it, and they've got to be flexible, and it's your property once you buy it.
Right. But the neat thing is that when these people are manufacturing things and selling them to manufacturers, so they may be building a pump or building a conveyor, and they'll be selling it to all the different types of manufacturers, but they'll give them a manual that tells them that they should always maintain it the same way. I don't think so. It's like,
I'm glad you brought that up. So when I entered the civilian sector from the military, and I started talking about things like level of repair analysis and maintenance task analysis, everyone's looking at me like I've got two heads, right? And they're like, what's this MTA thing? And I'm like, well, it fills the gap between a FMECA and a maintenance planning, traditional path. And one of the most important elements of it is that exactly. Like, even if you buy something that's been designed, it's not designed for your particular application. So if you're going to go maintain this thing and you're going to use the OEM recommendations and you don't do a maintenance task analysis, you're adopting whatever they told you should have without actually validating that for yourself. And it might not fit your program if you don't do like an MTA.
Right. My favorite example, which is a really true example, was that we had water pumps in the steel industry. One of the steel industry areas that I worked was in the coke ovens. And, if you can picture hell, you can picture the blast furnace and the coke ovens, because, it's hotter than hell, and it's really dusty, and really coke ovens are very disastrous places. And we had a water pump on one of the cars that would get the coke out of the ovens. It's called a pusher car. And this pump was used to cool the hydraulic units. And this is pumping tons of coke out of an oven that, if it doesn't move it within sort of an hour, it bakes to the side of the oven. And so it doesn't come out. So it's not fun. So we have this pump that's pumping cooling water for the hydraulic systems. It's in hot temperatures. There's dust everywhere. It doesn't matter what you do with the door. There's dust everywhere. And we have the exact same water pump over in the machine shop, over in this nice sort of area of the steel mill that's got grass outside and picnic tables. And, and in the summertime, it gets a little bit warm and the machinists don't like it. So they'll put a bit of air conditioning on and they'll use this pump to pump water, 4 or 5 times a year. You look at the manuals for them, they're the same manuals.
I get it. It's the same pump.
Yeah. You're going to maintain it the same way. It's like, so, when you try and explain to people, as you say, context and actually applying your tasks to what you need to do, not what it says in the book.
Yeah.
Great, great place to start, but that shouldn't be where you finish.
Yeah. So I always approach that from a platform perspective. In our, in my world of work, that's like platform specific stuff, right? And if you have fleets of vessels that operate in the same environmental context, then you're okay. But when you have some that are working in Arctic and some that are working in Caribbean, right. And so you're going to have different problems with different fleets based on these different environmental contexts. And you've got to manage the configuration differently sometimes. You'll appreciate this. We used to have these waste heat systems on the ship that would use the exhaust from the diesel generators that created power for the ship. To heat up our water coming through the evaporator and create steam so we could create drinking water out of seawater. And there were some other uses like, ventilation heating and that type of stuff. But it was crazy because when they built these engines and they Caterpillar had no intention of them running this hot. And the customer buys them and says, yeah, we're going to buy them. We're going to use them for waste heat. And Cat goes, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, we're going to put them in this system, this closed loop water system, and it gets really, really hot. And they're going to operate right around 245 degrees. The cooling water temp. And Cat's like, the cooling water temp's going to be 245? And they're like, yeah. Like, no. The high temp mark on this thing's, 210. That's shut it down. Coast Guard's like, we got it. So they wouldn't sell it. Well, this is the word on the street was they wouldn't warranty the engines because of that. And if Hank Kaczynski or Tom Moriarty are watching and they know better, go ahead and jump in the chat. But, that was a really controversial thing during that acquisition because Cat was like, this is not the, operating context these things were desired to satisfy. And we use those engines all the way up until almost this period, but we've had block line issues with them. So there were we experienced failures with the equipment that other industries weren't experiencing. But I'll tell you what, those things ran all day at 245.
Right.
All day.
Yeah, you can't do it. Well, they're doing it. So, sorry about that.
Pretty cool
and your examples bring up great points to just more than, the maintenance tasks. You think about it, there could be sort of vessels that are operating out mid-Atlantic, and you have vessels that are operating up and down the coast. Are they going to have the same amount of spare parts?
Yeah, well...
Are they going to be prepared? You can't just suddenly pull into port and say, okay, you nip into the stores and get me that. No, you're 2,000 miles out in the middle of the Atlantic. And so the whole approach in the context and this whole idea of you can't take the cookie cutter unless you're making cookies, which I did do at one time and I didn't particularly like it. But, you can't take these approaches for anything. It's not just the tasks. And what about people? Okay, maybe if somebody got sick, you could just pull into port, and maybe somebody could come in or whatever. What if you're in the middle of the Atlantic? Yeah. And you can do that on land. You look at places like Canada, where a paper mill in northern Canada versus a paper mill in Toronto.
Yeah.
Very, very different. So it's interesting.
So, on the people point, oh, by the way, Mohammed's on. Mohammed has never missed an episode.
Okay. Does he get a badge for that?
I don't know. We're going to have to come up with something.
Yeah, you have to come up with a badge.
Mohammed's He's been here consistently every week, and he's in Western Africa, and I say that every week. And Mohammed, welcome back, man. It's good to see you.
Welcome, Mohammed. I hope you're going to enjoy it.
Yeah, he's on a great learning journey. He's just tapping into so many different resources to learn, and they're trying to take the lessons they're learning and implement them in the mine where he works. So it's pretty cool.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
So yeah, so and this is super applicable to the conversation about context, right? So when not only does the prescribed maintenance activities for the thing you bought from the OEM, not only is that kind of canned to a certain degree around a certain user experience, but the technicians that they gear those toward are almost never properly planned at the end user level, right? So one of the things that we teach in supportability analysis, MTA, LoRa, all that stuff, which is really just life cycle management, is that when you go to do the analysis, you should make sure that you have the right level of talent, not just the numbers of bodies, but the right level of talent on board to do this. And that if you don't, that becomes part of your strategy in the future. Either develop it with your existing staff or hire somebody and change your, what we call a maintenance concept, right? Or a maintenance philosophy. So, I'm sure you've seen plenty of that.
Oh yeah, and I actually mentioned that in a presentation that I'll be doing at a conference that I'm not going to mention right here, even though it's September 14th. And I think if you if you need any more details, Sanya will provide them. No problem at all. That'll be great.
Well, is she choking you from talking about it? Because I have no.
No.
Okay.
So yeah, it's this idea of, do we really have the skill sets that we need? And as you say, in when we're doing the analysis, we need to be doing the analysis not just on what are the tasks, not what are the spare parts, but what are the competencies that are required?
Yep.
What are these competencies required? And then organizations need to look and sort of say, do we have that competency? And that's exactly what my talk is about who are the people we send to training and things like that. Do we do it? Do we send the people that, well, I'm not going to give you my presentation now, but
she appreciates that, trust me.
Yeah, well, we'll keep that till September 14th. But really it's you can't assume, as you say, the operating context and tradespeople and competencies are part of the context. They're very much so part of the context.
Well, and I think a lot of this conversation's been baked into the M&R community, but it's not happening in other elements of these same businesses. You and I spoke a little bit about municipalities.
Right.
I'm talking all day on meetings. And we also talked about asset management. And I'm still fascinated by the fact that asset management is so disparately adopted across different continents. Like, you talk to people in Australia and Canada and England, and it's way different conversation than it is here in the United States about asset management. And I am just fascinated by that delta and how the United States has had a different level of adoption. And I think part of it is that component that it's not being, if you adopt it, it's because you're adopting a standard that prescribes a lot of this to you. And so you use the standard to help adopt that and implement that type of program into your organization. And so you're following ISO 55000 or whatever the case is, and you're rocking and rolling. And now you're building this framework and you're building this program. And it's different if you're not doing that, right? If you're not just using a standard to get started and building a program around a standard that, by the way, all your partners in industry are telling you is the right thing to do. We talked about lean. This was big with lean, right? So I would love to, if you don't mind, Cliff, I'd like to talk a little bit about program implementation, and we could use asset management. We could talk about lean. We could talk about different leadership concepts. All that stuff flies to me.
No, and it's the same thing, as you mentioned these things as they go along. It's exactly the same challenge we have. And we go back to lean in the early 2000s, late 90s, 2000s, where I was very, very heavily involved in lean, took my Six Sigma things 20 odd years ago and did all of that stuff and really believed that it was the way to go. Part of my background helped me with that, because as part of my background, when I became a planning engineer, back in the 70s, I actually enrolled in industrial engineering. And it was kind of what lean kind of took industrial engineering and made it much more prescribable, as you said. So this is something that obviously worked for Toyota. There's no question about it. And the machine that changed the world was the book way back when that described lean, and it was great. And it came to North America, and when you think about W. Edwards Deming had gone to Japan and made it because he couldn't make things work, and yet his 14 points are so relevant. And so it comes to North America, and people are reluctant to take on lean.
They didn't have the right motivator yet, right? What did they need to happen? They needed the Japanese to kick their butt in auto sales.
Right. And that's it. Is when you think about, I remember when Honda came to UK, and it was very much like Hyundai coming to North America. They were the butts of jokes of comedians. People would have jokes, and it would be yeah, but it was in a Honda, and so we never ever got there. It was a Honda, and then all of a sudden, that they managed to change things, and all of a sudden, the most respected cars become, and the winners of the J.D. Powers become, and all of these things, and all of a sudden, you have the big three in North America going, "What's going on here?"
Yep.
We're seeing and as you say, it was that impetus to be more competitive that drove people to at least have flexible plants. I remember not far from our paper mill was 3 GM plants, and if they wanted to do retooling, it would take about 6 months to retooling to run a different model. Toyota were doing it in like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
With a flexible plant and all that. I think for me, with lean, my biggest disappointment was that we in North America cherry picked. So we would take 5S or something like that and said, okay, we're doing 5S, yes, and we're not even doing it properly, but we got this thing called 5S.
You can see it.
We really don't check on it, but we make sure that we got the 5S's. And that was an amazing story as well, where I went to one company and we started talking about parts, and they said, well, we used to have them, but they 5S'd them. And I said, what the hell is 5S them? They said, well, there wasn't enough room, so we threw them away. And I go, oh, come on, what's going on here? This is crazy. But people would take 5S and they would say, we're doing lean. Well, 5S is one very, very, very small part of lean. And what's happened is the same sort of thing has happened with asset management. A lot of North America has kind of said, okay, we're doing maintenance. We're going to really improve our maintenance reliability. And yes, because we've changed the title, it's now asset management. I can go back to the early 2000s when everything was maintenance. And then somebody hit on the word reliability, and then suddenly reliability department started showing up. And, all great sort of articles that had maintenance in their title reappeared with reliability in their title. Yeah. But it was the same things. There was one paper company that said they were going to hire 90 reliability engineers. And so I said, well, that's great. We were at a conference and I said, that's great. Where are you going to get them from? Because there's no real sort of pipeline for good reliability people. He said, oh, we're probably going to take them from the maintenance managers. I said, oh, that's great. And he said, well, what are they going to do differently? Yeah, nothing.
You're like, you do understand reliability engineering is like an actual thing.
Yeah, it's something completely different. But no, we've got a reliability department now. We've got reliability managers. We're doing it. We must be doing it.
They're saying FAMIA and FAMICA. Isn't that enough? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's and that's what's unfortunately happening with asset management. But as you say, for the there really is a disparity on how it's being taken, and I think the biggest reason that there's this disparity between actually North America, well, the U.S. more than even North America, the U.S. and most of the rest of the world is that driver issue that you talked about.
Yeah.
Where I live in Ontario, Canada, for those that may not know it's where it is, but Ontario, Canada, the provincial government has mandated asset management has to be implemented at every municipality. So it's not a question of if or when or maybe, it's everyone. And in fairness to the government, they're subsidizing training, they're subsidizing all of these things so that people can get trained. I've been teaching classes for the last 3 years to municipalities, and it's been great. And that's the difference, because in the UK, it was the government that mandated it. In Australia, it was it ended up becoming the government, but it was a bunch of engineering people who then formed the Asset Management Council in Australia and kind of lobbied the government to say, because their assets in Australia, it was roads and everything like that, were getting destroyed. But because there's not that sort of push from a government or someone like that, the hope was, and this was the hope from a number of the US people who were part of the ISO team, they're good friends, and their hope was, and their belief was that companies like insurance companies would turn around and say that, okay, if you implement asset management, if you become ISO 55000 certified, you get a preferential rate because you have shown that you're doing the best things, to keep your business running. So your business continuity is going to be there. It's going to be fine. But it hasn't happened yet. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, Suzanne Greenman and I were just talking about that. She was talking about that same approach in a conversation with the iOffice Asset Champion podcast. And Mike, I don't know if you've met Mike. He's just doing amazing stuff with that podcast. So anyone who's really interested in a good asset management podcast, that's a great podcast to start with. But they were having that conversation, and then I was having a conversation with Suzanne about that later. About there's a certain amount of accountability that has to be in place for some organizations to be motivated to adopt that type of programming. They just feel like it's an investment that they're not positive they'll get a return on, and without that external pressure, they're really not investing. And if it doesn't come from the market, it has to come from some authority. We had the same thing happen with the U.S. government with integrated logistics support for Department of Defense and other assets. We're designing billion-dollar things, and the government's, Congress is funding them with taxpayer dollars, and they want to make sure that you're being responsible in the design and support. And so they realized that it was much bigger than just the logistics support part of it. And logistics support, by the way, is not the same as like logistics as far as like transportation and goods and stuff like that most people associate it with in industry. So they came up with this more strategic approach, which is called product support. And they mandated in Title 10 authority that every major acquisition had to have a designated product support manager, and that person was responsible to the program manager and to Congress to make sure that they developed a product support management strategy and a product support management structure to sustain those assets, because they estimated that 60 to 70% of the total cost of ownership to the U.S. taxpayer occurred during sustainment. and it was eating our lunch because Congress would say, all right, well, here's X amount of money for the thing, go build the thing. And then the service would come back a couple years later when the thing was in service and say, hey, we need some more money to maintain those things you bought us. And it's like, well, what do you mean you need more money? You said it was going to cost $100 million a year. Yeah, well, we need $300 million a year. It's like, you know. And then when they start digging, they realize like, oh, well, maybe we didn't plan as well for this during the acquisition as we could have. All right, Title 10 authority mandating it. Now there's more. There's a handshake between the government and the government, if you will, about how that's going to happen. And I think it's just a matter of time before that starts to happen between the government and industries in greater volume here in the United States, and you'll see that change. It won't be and then of course you've got the business like market differentiators, you know, like what separates us from a competitor? Yeah. Well, they can say they're ISO 55000 compliant, some bullet to put on a flyer, you know?
Yeah, and it very much, very, very, very similar to what you described as what happened in Ontario, where the Ontario government said, you know, we don't mind giving grants. We will give grants to the municipalities and we will fund all of these things. But to be quite honest, we don't think we're getting any value out of this because we give you these grants, you set up a system or you get your assets aligned, what have you, and then you're back. Or, you know, we need more money. We don't have that money. And, you know, the taxpayers are going to have to find it. And really it is the taxpayers that are paying for everything. And that's what they said. And that's why they've mandated this, is to say, you know, we really don't believe that you are managing your assets to their full potential and getting the full value out of them. We think that you're just taking care of today's problems. And again, exactly what you're saying is that one of the things that the municipalities seem to have struggled with is really good demand analysis, you know, and demand planning and having these things set up so that they can say, okay, yeah, we don't have to come back in 5 or 10 years time. We've hit that. So very, very, very similar approaches to what you're describing. And yeah, when you think about ISO 9000, it had that market differentiator way back when. You probably were too young to remember it coming out, but I remember it coming out. And if you didn't fly the flag, you weren't doing business. And
when was that?
Oh gosh, back in the 90s, yeah.
I was in high school partying it up.
Yeah, and in what we called it was repeatable rubbish. Because it was, as long as you said you were going to produce garbage and you said that you had documented producing garbage and you produced garbage, you could be 9,000 certified because that's all it was. Wow. Now that's changed over the years and now it's a completely different standard in continuous improvement, but that was the price of admission. Wow. That hasn't happened with 55,000. You know, there's nothing there that says that unless, you know, you have ISO certified 55,000, we're not going to do business with you. That's not happening at all. But that's exactly what happened with 9,000. And I think part of the fact that it was in the early stages repeatable rubbish, a lot of companies are a little bit hesitant. They're beginning to say, well, you know, other than the price of admission, we really don't see that we got anything out of 9,000. And so they're reluctant to start with 55,000.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. You get the okay, here's the shiny new thing. Here's the thing everyone's forcing on me. You know, it's like I've operated for 30, 40, 60, 80 years without this. Why do I need this all of a sudden?
Right.
Overcoming that's a big obstacle for established companies or established organizations, period. Yeah. I'm fascinated by the work you did with the standard. Could you talk a little bit about what that experience is like? I mean, not too many people get to do that.
I actually wasn't on the team. I was. I won't mention names, but there were three members of the U.S. tag team, and we used to have little conference calls on a regular basis and talking. I also became quite friendly, fairly friendly with people like Rhys Davis, who was chair of the committee, and so was able to get a lot of insights as to what was going on, and it did kind of intrigue me. And as I said, you know, the thing that kind of disappointed me or disappoints me a little bit is that those members of the U.S. tag team really were believers in true asset management. In you know, really did a good job of making sure that it was a different standard, and it is a different standard. And yet, when it gets out into the marketplace, it just hasn't taken off. But yeah, it's tough.
I'm gonna make T-shirts. That's it. I'm gonna become a lobbyist.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I'm a board member with PMAC, the Asset Management Association of Canada, and that's what we are trying to do, finding a way of being lobbyists and finding a way, you know, sort of advocates for asset management. But the other strange thing is that another good friend of mine, we had a good chat, Drew Troyer, way back when we were talking about it, and we said, you know, and agreed that good forward-thinking companies were doing asset management before it was ever called asset management.
Right. They've got the functions in place, the activities.
Yeah, they may not have had, not the titles, they may not have had the framework that looks like it, but those things that were required to, you know, to achieve good asset management, they were doing. So it was a case of, okay, maybe if we give it a title, and you know this, you know this experience is that if it doesn't have a title, then people are not going to get involved, you know. But once you give it a title, okay, it's called asset management, you know. It's, I remember about all of these things, you know, like situational management. Oh, I didn't know it was called that, but I've been doing it for a long time. It's great, you know. And it was the same with asset management. The good companies were practicing and still practice asset management. They may not call it that, but the 55,000 and this latest rebirth with asset management, it fills the gap, and you know, and it does give guidance if companies want to do it. The only challenge is that people will pick and choose, and the same as with Lean, the same as with Six Sigma, same as with this, is that if you take the little bits, you never get the benefit of the whole, and that's sad, because
it's, you know, it's a system kind of approach to implementing. Well, I guess I should say more of like a programmatic approach, right? And it doesn't work if certain elements of the program are in place and others are not. I find this to be the same with any type of like complex methodology or approach to doing something. Project management's real big with that. You know, I've done agile coaching. I've done you know, traditional project management, predictive type approaching. I don't want to call it waterfall, but you know, I've seen where, you know, people are like purists, one or the other. They don't know how to cross-pollinate the methods. They don't understand that each of the things, you're not doing it just because you were told you should do it. It has to actually provide some value to the project and the team, and that it's tailorable for every unique instance. But you can't argue with the fact that some things just have to be there, right? Like you can't run a successful project but not communicate. You can't run a successful project but not manage stakeholder expectations. Like, that's just not going to work. Your definition of a successful project is skewed if you lose sight of that. And so, you know, there's the elements of asset management that you have to have, you just have to have in place. And if you know, nitpick the little things that you want out of it and leave the rest, and just be honest and don't call it a real asset management program.
Right. Yeah. You know, call it something. Absolutely. I have no problems with that, you know, and really, it was in Lean. If you wanted to say you implemented 5S, great. If you wanted to say you had, you know, value stream mapping and that's all you did, that's great. But it's not Lean. And it's the same with asset management. You know, if you want to pick and choose the bits, that's fine, but it's not true asset management. So, you know, that's the challenge, is that, the other thing I think is that people get caught up in compliance versus understanding. and it's okay, yeah, you must have these things, but do you truly understand why you must have these things? Why these things are important? Because compliance really gets you the minimum. It's understanding and application that's going to get you the real worth and get you in. And that's what I see very often. And that's what the challenge that we're facing in Ontario is that, sure, municipalities will meet the goals of, the Ontario government, but it will be in a compliance way. They will be able to say, yes, we've got this, and point their finger at it. And then when you dig underneath and say, well, what's it do? Well, I don't know. It's a bit like these reliability engineers. They're not going to do anything different. But we've got this thing now called an asset management plan. All we actually did was put the title on a page, something like that. But it's.
Yeah. I worked with a Canadian shipyard one time, and we asked them, hey, do you have an asset management strategy? Do you have an asset management program? And they just looked at us and they're like, yeah, we don't have that, man. Could you help us organize our maintenance program first? And I'm like, okay, well, let's look at it together, because if you neglect the top, if you neglect the strategic programming, where are you going to get the sponsorship and support for these things at the bottom you're trying to implement, right? I think that's one of the big missing links in the adoption of asset managers. They don't realize that it empowers resourcing of lower levels when you do it right, because the asset management functionality is more strategic, and it's basically your organization signing on to fund and execute a certain way. And if you can get that in place, you're one step closer to the sponsorship you've been complaining you can't get, to support the resourcing you can't get. And it's just like this big vicious circle. I hate to see the adoption get left behind because they haven't done a good job of getting the dream of asset management or good reliability engineering or good maintenance practices and programming in place at the appropriate level. And if we neglect the more strategic level stuff because we think it's shelfware, it's just going to be writing in a book that gets put away somewhere, then you're missing the entire point of that programming. It's to drive the results down to that level and then extract the value there.
Right, absolutely. And, it's interesting, and you talk about being in Canadian shipyards and things like that. But one of the biggest challenges that we see with the municipalities and implementing asset management is silos, where, yes, this department, stands by itself, and it actually may have a bit of an asset management sort of taint to it. But because it's in a silo, it doesn't work. And that brings me to my favorite silo story. We were doing a conference one time, and we had 3 naval officers, and they're the people that talk to me about this, stores in the Atlantic and all of those things. They kind of keyed me up with that. And the 3 of them were up there, and they were talking about, that their challenge is that, yes, one department knows what it's doing, but it doesn't know what the others are doing, and so they don't, and they have these silos. So at the end of the session, and there were 3 sailors up there, we called up he was the highest serving naval person, Admiral Ron, I call him. His name was Ron. We called up Admiral Ron onto the stage, and we said, okay, Admiral Ron, what have you got to say? And he says, well, first of all, I would just like to point out that in the Canadian Navy, we don't have silos. And I'm kind of, excuse me, Admiral Ron, but we just heard these 3 people telling us all about silos. And Admiral Ron said, I'm telling you, Cliff, we don't have silos. And I said, well, I don't know what to say, Admiral Ron, because, these guys are saying, yes, Cliff, we don't have silos. We have cylinders of excellence. And that was like, okay, right. He said, yeah, we've got these cylinders all over the place and everybody's doing excellent work inside them, but they have no idea what's going on in the next cylinder. And it was like, okay, so that's what I use for silos now, as cylinders of excellence. So, and that's the challenge, and that's the difference. And that's where maintenance and reliability will benefit from if we do asset management, is we break down these, and as you say, thinking about, like systems thinking and all of these things that go in doing the analysis up front, all the things that, we've talked about. In an asset management world, maintenance has raised, it's people understand how what they do affects maintenance and reliability, because maintenance and reliability communicates that if they can't do what they're doing, we're not going to achieve the value that those guys at the top said we needed to achieve. So, and we break down those silos, hopefully.
Well, one of the nice things about the product support environment and the integrated logistics environment is that they mandated the I in the beginning. It's integrated logistics support or integrated product support, and it removes our ability when we're doing this sustainment and life cycle planning to say, oh, we missed that part about the supply chain.
Yeah.
No, supply support is one of the key elements. Oh, we missed that element of training. Well, training is a key element. Well, we missed that part about maintenance and repair. Maintenance repair is a key element. Like, we can't avoid any of these things because we're forced into the I umbrella, which, by the way, is a blessing. And when we retroactively try to talk about those things out in industry, we oftentimes get that same response, like, yeah, we're not that unified. And the key component there that I find interesting is that you're not unified, but are you doing anything intentional about rectifying that?
Right.
It's okay to recognize that you have a shortfall, but to then just allow it to continue is kind of, reckless abandon to me. I think a good leader will take the initiative to try and right that at some point, and it doesn't have to be right now, but at least put a plan together to say, look, 2-3 years from now, we are going to be compliant with this standard, or we are going to have this adoption, or we are going to start using the word I, or the letter I in front of all our things so we can be integrated. And we're not just going to go like this when we do it. We're going to actually do it.
No, that's it. And and the whole other hour that we're going to talk about now will be around cascading collaborative goals.
There you go.
Again, we don't have them. Everybody builds their goals in isolation, and you can't do that.
So I'm going to take a note on that, and that is going to be next time you and I meet up. If you'll come back, would you like to come back sometime?
Sure. It's harder to shut me up than start me up. So it's.
Well, as you can see, I have the same issue. Which is, by the way, baffling to my Navy counterparts and some of the other people I work with in the company, because we'll be sitting in a meeting and I won't say a single word. And they're like, dude, what are you doing? Like, why aren't you talking? I'm like, I have nothing of value to contribute that's not already being said. And I'm observing and learning and listening so that when we leave here, I can do something with the information I've just been provided. And they're just like, who are you? You're usually... No, it's funny because the comment that I make to people is that you think I talk a lot? You should see how much I listen, because that's where I get everything from. Is I ain't smart enough to think about these things myself. I listen to smart people, and then I can remember it. But I may be talking a lot, but I'm listening a lot more. Yeah,
because
that's great. So that's why we have the ear to mouth ratio that we have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Cliff, we're coming up on the end of our hour here, and I am I got to thank you so much for joining us. You're a remarkable human being. You've got so much experience. You're always a joy to talk with. I love interacting with you. We've been in a few empowering, community.
Yep.
And it's always like just full on smile.
It's great. Absolutely.
Yeah, and Charlie's set up such a great environment, and whenever we can all meet up in those groups, it's fun to just kind of hang out and share and stuff. And I have to give a special shout out to Miss Sonia Mathura because she's making her comments, right? But Sonia reached out to me and said, "Hey, you need to hurry up and get Cliff on there. I'm sick of looking at your face." And I said, "Okay." Maybe I'm paraphrasing. She didn't say exactly that. But, thanks, Sonia, for encouraging me to move Cliff up on the list of folks, and I'm just grateful that we had a chance to have you here, and I would love to get you back, Cliff. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Honestly, is, as I said, harder to shut me down than stand me up.
So where can people reach you, find you, learn from you? Like, where are you at these days?
You'll find me on LinkedIn. I'm getting back into the LinkedIn swing. I can be reached at People and Processes. I do work with People and Processes, Jeff Shiver and that group. I'm also my own little company, which is TMS Asset Management, and you can reach me there. Just post something. There's Upkeep. We have Upkeep, the maintenance community. So, just reach out, and I'll be more than happy to reply.
Excellent. Yeah, Cliff is very responsive. I have a really funny short story to share right before we go away. Yesterday, I called Suzanne to talk about some other things, Suzanne Greenman, and I'm wearing an Upkeep T-shirt, and she's sitting there like this, and I went, "What are you wearing?" And she goes, "Oh, my Upkeep T-shirt." And I said, "I've got to get a picture of this for Ryan Chan." Just a random, we're randomly running across each other with these Upkeep T-shirts on. It's got to be like a thing now. We got to get started. So.
Yeah, everyone has to have a uniform. It'll be.
That's it. Yeah, in the Upkeep maintenance community, the maintenance community is so fantastic. And for those that are watching this and aren't in that community, get on there. Cliff's on there. I'm on there. Sonia's on there. Everybody's on there. And we love to interact with people in that space. And as always, Cliff, thanks for being such a great presence on LinkedIn. That's where I first met you, and it's just been great learning from you here on LinkedIn. And I appreciate you coming on today, man. Thank you so much.
No, my pleasure. Yeah, and, my pleasure. Love to come back.
Yes, sir.
Bye, everyone.
Yep. Take it easy, guys. Be good human beings to each other. Take it easy.